Hey there! Welcome to Gathering Folds. I'm Madonna, and today we're learning to fold this alternating buttons pattern, which has a whole bunch of hybrid square twists on the back. So this is fairly dense spacing. It does use these hybrid square twists. This is a relatively advanced pattern. So if you haven't practiced hybrid square twists yet, definitely try those out first. And in this tutorial, we're using a 32 division square grid, and that's not going to get us precisely this amount of pattern. It'll be somewhat less. And the other thing to notice is that this grid is not parallel to the edges of the paper. These grid lines are hitting at an angle, and if you want to have this nice alignment, you need a rotated grid with fraction 1/4 to start your grid. But for practicing the pattern, a standard grid is plenty. So I'm going to start with a closed square twist in the center. And I'm going to do that by finding the center of the pattern by folding my paper in half in one direction and then half in the other direction. And then I have 1, 2, 3 of the mountain folds for a closed square twist. I just need the fourth one, and then I can set up my closed square. This is specifically a right-handed closed square twist. And with that set up, I can go ahead and zoom in a lot closer while we squash the twist. So I'm pressing just outside of where the corners will land, which is one space out from the center of the twist. And in this pattern, there are 3 elements. There's the closed square that we already saw. There's an open square on the same side, and there's the hybrid squares that are in between all of the regular squares. And so the variable here is what side of the paper is the hybrid square on. It's on the back of the paper relative to the closed and the open square. And what orientation is it relative to the closed square? So both the closed square and the open square are in positions of 4-fold rotational symmetry in the broader pattern, which means I see the same thing on all 4 sides of both of these squares. But given that the hybrid square twist has to squash in one of 2 possible ways, I'm treating the closed square twist as a position of 4-fold rotational symmetry, so that you see all the long ends pointing in or all of the long ends pointing away from these closed squares, and I'm using opposite orientations on different sides of the open square. So functionally on this side, the closed square is the positions of 4-fold rotational symmetry, and the open square is in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry. So then the question is the pleat from the hybrid square, the through line pleat, is that going to the closed square or not? And in this case, it is not. It is actually going, so the option is to the closed square is the through line, or around the closed square is the through line. And in this case, it's around. And conveniently for us, we get to use tube pleat spacing. So I'm going to have 2 spaces between these parallel valley folds. And hopefully you don't hear too much of the chainsaw in the background. But that's what's going on today. And mountain fold 1 space further. This is the mountain fold that will continue straight on up through. Incidentally, creating a tube up above. And we need to move the horizontal mountain fold one space down, and the valley will jump to the far side. So for our first hybrid square twist here, notice this does not squash cleanly. I need to squash one side as a closed square and the other side as an open square. And I have chosen to let the tail go into the center like we saw in this completed version, letting that tail go into the center. So I need the closed bit down here. And what I'm trying to do is pinch things so that this new mountain fold on the diagonal relative to the grid goes straight back into the corner and hits a grid intersection. With that in place, I can squash the half of an open square on top. Rotating around, I'll do the same thing again. I have my valley fold one space out from this existing folded mountain, my mountain fold one space further, and you can probably already start to see the conflict that's coming, which isn't as bad as it looks, because I'm going to open up. I'm just opening the pleat from the closed square, so this pleat through here, and I can let this new pleat add on to the existing pleat and become a double depth pleat, passing under the hybrid square twist. Then I need to move my horizontal mountain one space down, and the valley jumps down below. And then I'm squashing the hybrid square twist with the closed portion down below and the open portion on top. Okay, now I want to resolve this pleat overlap right away. So I'm going to flip over, and this is where we put our open square twist. I have two of the pleats that belong to the open square twist already in place, coming from these two hybrid square twists. So I'm opening up. Notice I'm leaving one grid spacing worth of pleat down below and adding in my remaining pleats. One of the nice features of this pattern is I do have tube pleat spacing everywhere. So I have a tube down below and a tube above the twist. And I can squash everything in place. Okay, so now if I want to continue onwards, I think the easiest thing to do is to find the next closed square, or sorry, the next open square first, and then the hybrid square. So we're not dealing with this, okay, we need the double depth pleat and we're going to go back and fold the open square. So the question is, where exactly do I put this next open square? And I'm going to argue that we should do it on this pleat instead of this one. And basically that's looking at the pattern and saying, which one is kind of further out. So on this pair of parallel pleats, I connect this pleat out here, and this pleat goes all the way in, a couple spaces further in. So we want to start further out and work our way in, so we don't end up running pleats through existing twists. And looking at these corners of the open square that are touching hybrid square slits, I see they're touching right at the outside of that slit, so I would expect the valley fold for my next open square to come to this end of the slit. I can also see that by symmetry around the closed square. So this slit, you go past and you hit the open square corner. So this one you go past and you hit the corner. So now we're going to start using the technique that we will use the entire rest of the pattern, which is reordering the first pleat overlap that you come to. So the target grid square for my open square is this one that I've marked here. It's bordered by this existing mountain and the mountain that we defined that we would need. And then the first overlap that we encounter is this one up above. I'm going to open that pleat to run my new vertical pleat through first. And I'm making sure that underneath it really is running through, it's staying flat. And then I'm going to find my remaining pleats. And what happens here is that I end up adding another pleat to this pleat down below. It ends up being double depth, so 2 spaces down to the valley as you go out to the edge. And then we can get our open square twist. And I am keeping an eye on the chat, so if you have any questions, definitely let me know. So now I have a pleat overlap. I'm going to flip over and turn that into a hybrid square twist. So I'm going to open up. Notice on this double depth pleat, I'm just opening 1 grid spacing worth. I'm leaving 1 grid spacing of pleat there. And then I'll open enough to run my new horizontal, or by the time I'm back in this orientation, it's horizontal pleat. Again, with the tube pleat spacing, my through line carried through around the closed square hole. And I'm going to squash with the closed portion here. Now, this doesn't want to squash with the closed portion down there. So I'm going to pinch and push. And if it's still not cooperating, I would go to the back side and use my bone folder to smooth this diagonal line into the corner. And from there, I can squash the open square, or the half an open square, equivalent to a closed right triangle twist on top. Okay. Now we have 3 parallel pleats, and they're very clearly attaching at different distances from the edge. I'm going to start with this one that's the closest to the edge, and it needs to go to an open square. So I oriented with these 3 pleats horizontal going out to my right. I'm going to use the same spacing that we saw for the previous open square. I'll mark my target square there. And now we have more pleats. I'm only reordering the first overlap. So the top pleat is going to stay folded. I'm opening the middle pleat, making sure primarily that the valley can run through, because you can see that the mountain is running through. You have to be extra careful to make sure that the valley is also running through. I'm running that all the way to the edge of the paper, and then opening up my first pleat to get that open square, and I'm adding the pleat from the open square to the pleat from the reordered overlap to get a double depth pleat. And then I can flip back. I've got my overlap. I'm going to be sending a valley fold down through here. The mountain line is on the same grid line it's currently on, because that's the through line direction. And I'm going to open up. I'm first going to open up this bottom overlap so I can send the new valley fold down through first. And there's a little bit of chicken and the egg situation going on, because do you set up the twist first or do you reorder the overlap first? You can't get either of those flat before the other one is done. So a little bit of chicken and the egg. I'm making sure, because I have a double depth pleat and a tube pleat, I'm making sure the double depth pleat is wrapping down around my open square. So looking on the other side, I'm making sure it's wrapping down around instead of getting tucked in. This is happier for the paper. And then I want to squash my hybrid square with the closed bit down on top of this overlap, which is proving slightly complicated, but not too bad. And then I can squash the open square above. So it was looking kind of wrinkled, but by the time everything came down flat, it pretty much smoothed out. So now we have another overlap. I'm going to flip over, and I'll go ahead and rotate that and turn that overlap. Again, with the double depth pleat, we're opening just one spacing of that. And putting in our fourth open square twist. Okay, so now we have the core of the pattern. You'll notice that we have one closed square, and then we did alternating hybrid and open squares. I can tell you already, right now, that in the next ring around the center, we're going to be alternating closed squares and hybrid squares with no open squares. How do I know this already? Well, I'm very familiar with the tiling, the underlying structure behind this pattern, and the symmetry extension, how the symmetry points are laid out on that tiling for this particular pattern. One of the reasons why I'm so familiar with the structure is because I've been teaching it for years, and the other is because it's the topic of the month in Tessellation Academy this month. So if you want an even deeper dive into the structure, we do have a live session on Wednesday, and you can sign up at any time. Even if you're watching this, you know, months or years in the future, you can sign up and watch the recording. So now I'm going to move to the next set of parallel pleats. I'll work across those and then across each set of parallel pleats in turn. That will complete the next ring around the center. Starting with this pleat that is attaching closest to the edge of the paper. It's coming from a twist on this side, so I need to flip over. And I need a hybrid square twist here. My valley is going to come to the corner of my open square, just like it does on the opposite side of the open square. This is why we talked about the symmetry points earlier. I can say whatever's on one side of the open square is also on the opposite side. And I can also say that the through line of the hybrid square twist, which comes out of the right angle corners, is going to the open square. So I'm going to have my valley, my parallel mountain, one space away. These are going to cross the next pleat, and so I'm reordering the next pleat overlap. And then I'm looking and saying, okay, my through line is coming from the open square, so this mountain needs to push over one more space, which also preserves my tube pleats everywhere situation. I can close this pre-existing pleat down below and get the rest of my hybrid square set up. Now this hybrid square, it does want, more or less, to squash correctly, but in this orientation, it's really hard to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to rotate so I can actually look into that pocket to squash the closed portion, and then I can rotate back into our original orientation to squash the rest. Now I'm going to follow the overlap, following it to the opposite side of the paper where I need a closed square twist. So this is basically, these squares are identical to these squares, and in between I need a closed square. So my valley is going to come up through there. I'll open these overlaps. I can find my closed square center, and I'll reorder the next overlap, sending this valley and parallel mountain through first all the way to the edge, and then restoring the pleat that was already going through that area, and press to squash. From here, there's another overlap. I'm going to flip over and open up, and remember those rules that we had identified about the through line of the hybrid square twist. The through line does not come from the closed squares, it comes from the open squares. And so when I'm opening this up, I'm making sure that I'm choosing the through line that's coming from the open square, and then shifting the other direction over 1 grid spacing, and notice around this closed square, the closed portions of the hybrid are closer in. So, or rather, let's see how to describe it. The pointy bits are further away. Either way you want to describe it, this bit is going to be the closed portion. And I can press to squash. And then get the rest of my hybrid square. So now the next set of parallel pleats is going to look a little bit different. So rotating that to be horizontal because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pleats to work with instead of 3. This is expected. Every time the first set of pleats is 1 less than the rest of the sets and the last one is 1 more, whether you're on triangle grid or square grid. And so I'm coming from a hybrid square. I need to flip over to get to the next closed square, which is at tube pleat spacing. So 2 spaces between the valley under here and my new valley fold. And I will reorder the first overlap. Because the next twist is on the opposite side of the paper, and because the valley fold is closer to the middle, I will always reorder the first overlap. And that is true for every single twist that I'm folding in this pattern, unless there are no overlaps. And if you see me looking away distracted, that's because people are cutting a very big tree right next to a house in front of me. And flipping over, I can open up the next overlap. I can recognize that the through line of this hybrid twist, because we're on the hybrid side, is coming from the open square. So the mountain fold continues on the same grid line. And then the next pleat pops over, and I need to reorder the next overlap. So I don't have to be omniscient about reordering the overlap before I figure out where the pleats for the twist are. And I'm going to rotate around so I can see into the pocket while I'm setting up the squash for this hybrid square twist. And rotating. And flipping over. I've got another closed square twist to work with. And the reason for reordering the overlaps is to make opening the overlap on the other side a lot easier. So I'll reorder this overlap. And you'll notice as I'm working through, this pleat going out to the edge is just marching over and over and over and over as we go across the set of parallel pleats. And flipping over, I've got an overlap that I will open. I'm identifying the through line as coming from the open square and shifting over the next pleat, which incidentally makes tube pleat spacing. I'm paying attention to which closed square I'm closest to decide which side of the hybrid square to make closed. And then I'll flip over, take the next set of parallel pleats. You'll notice we're doing precisely what I said, alternating closed and hybrid square twists. And I'm going to do this next edge without marking the folds, so you can see what that looks like. So I'm finding my tube pleat spacing, running that valley all the way out to the edge. And setting up the rest of my closed square twist, allowing that pleat from the open square to close back up, and press to squash. Amazing. Big crash, no damage to the house. Okay, excellent. And they perfectly placed it between the gas meter and the bunch of black raspberry bushes that I transplanted. Even better. And then the next overlap, I've got a hybrid square. The through line is coming from the open square. I'm going to push that over. So pushing this mountain, the offset one, over one space, that gives me the lines to use when reordering the first overlap. And I need to rotate so I can see into that pocket for squashing the hybrid square. You might be noticing as we're working around that we're also alternating in the closed squares which ones have the tails in and which ones have the tails out. Tails in, out, in, and we'll keep alternating as we go around. This is something that you don't really have to store in your head. You can just look around you on the pattern to see what's happening next. And then flipping over, I've got the next closed square, and I'll reorder that overlap. Oh yeah, no worries about being late. I would recommend that everyone actually fold from the replay anyways, because you get to actually, pause and go back and see things multiple times. And flipping over again, I'm going to put in another hybrid square. This time I have no overlaps, so I am free and unencumbered. And I'm making a tube pleat on both sides of the twist, adding in the closed portion and the open portion. So my cues here for what orientation to squash the hybrid twist are that the closed squares have 4 of the same, one way or the other. It's one of the two. And the open squares have 2 of each. So 2 closed bits closest and 2 open bits closest. That's as symmetric as it can get with this pattern. And yeah, definitely harder to try and keep up with the tutorial. Mostly I go at this speed to keep the tutorial around an hour on this size of grid, which we may or may not hit this time. And so now I've got 5 parallel pleats, starting with the pleat from the hybrid square that I just folded, and I can set up my closed square, reorder the next overlap. And like I mentioned before, the closed square and the reordered overlap, neither of them is going to lay fully flat until both of them are all the way set up. And squash. Sorry, you get a bit of nose drippy action. And flip. And hybrid square with the through line from the open square twist, pushing the other direction over 1 space and making sure to reorder the next overlap. Just the first overlap, not any of these overlaps down below. And with this one, we want the tail in, so the closed bit needs to be up top. I'll rotate so I can see what I'm doing. And press to squash. And flipping over again, I've got that overlap, and because I reordered it, it's super easy to open up and put in my new closed square and reorder the next overlap. And press to squash. You'll notice in this ring around the center, we have not had any double depth pleats. What we have had are accordion pleats. So that's an interesting tidbit. Next up, I'm flipping back to the hybrid square side, opening up that overlap, and finding my hybrid square twist pleats, reordering the next overlap. This one I actually do have to reorder, or the tail of the hybrid square would be folding in parts of the pleat down below, which is not what I want. It would be adding extra folds to the paper and making it really hard to squash precisely. So with that reordered, I'm free to squash this closed bit and then the open bit. And flipping over, I've got one more closed square to finish out this ring around the center. Okay, so now I've got this chunk of the pattern. It's a square chunk, and if you look at the edge of the paper, you'll be like, oh, that square chunk is not lining up with the edge, not lining up how this one did. And again, that's because of the rotated grid that I used. You can find the rotation fractions for all of my patterns inside of Tessellation Garden, the collection of all of my designs, at least all the ones that I've folded and photographed, which is currently over 650. So quite a substantial number of patterns. This one, I'll just go ahead and tell you the rotation fraction for the grid is 1/4. If you want to have the tiling breaks align with the edge of the paper. So next up, another ring around the center. The next ring will be alternating open and hybrid squares. And so notice this series of, we've got a closed square in the center, then we're alternating open and hybrid. Then we're alternating closed and hybrid. Then we're alternating open and hybrid. This is something that's actually pretty easy to see in the tiling diagram because there's rings around the center and you see either blue and white or gold and white squares. And those are the colors that I typically use for this structure. And so it's easier to identify, oh, it's going to be fourfold symmetry A or fourfold symmetry B plus the hybrid square. And in this structure, the twist between these two that are in positions of fourfold rotational symmetry is always a hybrid square. It has to be a hybrid square to get different sizes of these twists. And if these two are not different sizes, then it's an alternating pattern. And the other twist is also a position of fourfold rotational symmetry, which means there are many fewer patterns to be found. One of the cool things about this structure is I figured out how the size and orientation of the hybrid square affects the difference in size between the two twists in the higher symmetry positions, which I'll go into more with my Tessellation Academy students on Wednesday. So we'll continue on to the next ring, folding around the center, starting with the shortest pleat, which I need to flip over to put in a hybrid square twist. And I'm finding the pleats first this time. So what I was looking for, actually, I'll draw, is tube pleat spacing from here to the valley underneath. And this is exactly the same as those 4 hybrid squares I did around the center. I can go ahead, once I know that, and send that pleat all the way down to the bottom through all of these other pleats. And that is going to be my through line. So it's also going to go all the way up to the top, or rather the mountain is going all the way up. The valley is on the opposite side of the mountain. And this horizontal mountain needs to come down from here to here, 1 grid spacing. And this pleat adds on to the pleat underneath. Because the mountain fold of this pleat underneath is on the same grid line as the valley fold of the pleat from the twist, and a mountain fold plus a valley fold, fully folded, cancel out and make a flat surface. So you just have the valley fold underneath from the pre-existing pleat and the mountain fold up above from the new twist. And then I'm going to find the closed portion of my hybrid square twist Again, rotating the paper so I can actually see into that pocket. And squash everything. Flipping the paper over, I'm going to open the overlap, which is just the first of the 2 pleats. So the second one stays, and I'll have an open square twist up above. Here again, I have to reorder this overlap because I don't want these layers underneath to get folded into the open square twist. So I'm finding the valley fold of that open square twist, sending it all the way out to the edge along with the corresponding mountain fold. And that allows me, and again, I'm going to make sure to wrap this around the pleat on the back instead of sticking it inside of this pleat pocket. So I'm wrapping around to give the paper just a little bit more freedom to stretch out, or stretch is the wrong word, but to lay flat. And then I can squash my open square twist. Flipping over, I'll repeat the process, opening up the first pleat of the double depth pleat, leaving the second one as part of the open square twist. I'm setting up the next hybrid square twist, keeping in mind the through line is coming from the open square. Through line is always coming from the open square. And for this one, I'm taking my cue from the opposite side of the open square. The closed bit needs to be closer to the open square. One of the tricks that can help the new fold go straight into the corner, and I'm going to pull out a little bit because mine overshot, is letting this flap fold over on top. That enforces basically a closed square with one pleat flipped. I didn't quite get there for this one, but given all these layers, it's kind of hard to go back in and mess with it. So I'm going to leave that corner slightly messy by my standards, and cover that mess with the open portion of the hybrid square twist. And flipping over, I've got my next overlap. I'm opening just one of the pleats that's composing that double depth pleat, finding my new open square twist, and I have to reorder the overlap to separate out the layers of paper. And again, wrapping around the pleat underneath, I can press and squash. And flipping over again, I'm going to open up, again, one of the pleats of the set of parallel pleats. I'm letting my through line come out from the open square. So this vertical is going to jump over one space. And of course, it's going to make a tube. And I'm looking at the opposite side. The open bit is closest to the open square hole. So my closed bit needs to be further away. This one is really fighting me. And one of the things that helps in this situation is to let the area of the paper outside of the pocket. So in there is the pocket. It really wants to be a 3D corner. It really, really wants to have a valley fold running down through here that's at 90 degrees. So if you let the rest of the pattern lift up, then it's easier to squash the closed portion of the hybrid square, and then you can get into the open portion. And sometimes those corners just do not want to cooperate. There we go. And now I can do the next set of parallel pleats. Flipping over, I need an open square twist. And I'm going to reorder that first overlap, sending my new pleat all the way up through. And sending a pleat down as well. So you can see this is a really dense pattern, and we get quite a lot of twists on a fairly small grid. So continuing around, I'll flip over, open up the pleat overlap, which restores the mountain at single depth pleat spacing. Remember, the through line's coming from the open square, so my offset direction is horizontal this time. And I'm opening the next pleat down to reorder that pleat overlap. And in this case, the closed bit is further down. I'm going to take my own advice and let this area lift up while I press my closed portion and squash the rest of the hybrid square. And flip over, open the pleat overlap, and this will be an open square on this side with the next pleat overlap reordered and feeding into a double depth pleat. And flipping over. So you can see there's a pattern here. We flip over, we open the overlap, we set up the next twist, we reorder the next overlap. And in this ring around the center with the open squares, we end up with a double depth pleat. Then we look and see, well, at least with the hybrid squares, we look and see which way are we going to squash. Do that. Squash the part on top. So basically, squash the twist. And then flip over, repeat. Open the overlap, set up the new twist, reorder the next overlap, which makes a double depth pleat in this case. In this ring around the center, every single twist will, with the exception of the ones that have no overlaps. And then we'll flip over and find the next twist. So this is an algorithm that I'm following to fold every single one of these twists. And once I've identified the algorithm for the pattern, then it becomes much easier to fold. So I'm saying, okay, I'm starting a new set of parallel pleats. I need tube pleat spacing. And once I find my twist, I can reorder my overlap and squash. Then I'm going to follow my pleat overlap. Every time I'm flipping the paper over, opening the overlap, finding the pleats of the next twist, reordering the next overlap, squashing the twist, and then following the overlap onwards. Oop. The squash the twist part is a little bit harder with the hybrid square, but it's the same set of steps. Flip over, open the overlap, find the twist, reorder the next overlap, make sure everything's happy and able to lay flat, then squash the twist, and follow the pleat overlap to the next twist on the opposite side. And there I was not looking in the pocket, and it did not turn out precisely. But it can be fixed. And flipping over. I've got my next open square. And my next hybrid square to round out this set of parallel pleats. And again, I'm letting the pocket sit 3D. I'm letting a valley form and just let it be 90 degrees, not a full valley fold. And then that can relax back when we squash the open portion on top. I need a bit of water and a cough drop. Before the last set of parallel pleats. Okay, so I'm on my last set of parallel pleats. I want to start with the shortest one, flipping over. That will need a open square twist at tube pleat spacing. And we've got the perfect amount of grid to do this number of rings around the center without partial twists, which I think is an excellent place to stop the pattern if you're using a standard grid. And flipping over. I've got my hybrid square. And I need the closed portion to be down below. And then my open portion on top. We're also completing these little kind of pinwheel patches that we saw in the center as we work our way around. So this will be the last set of parallel pleats for the whole tutorial, not just for this ring around the center. And there we go. Nice open square with the reordered pleat overlap feeding into a double depth pleat wrapping around the one below, or the pleat below, and opening up. Reordering the next overlap, and I've got closed bit closer to the open square. And squash the rest. And flipping over, I've got an open square, which I can set up and squash with the reordered pleat overlap. I mean, if I didn't reorder this overlap, I would have a pleat. Well, I think it was looking different before I reordered it. But anyways, it would be a whole other mess and create additional folds in the paper that I don't need. And another hybrid, another reordered overlap, and the closed bit will be on this side. And I'm kind of air folding this diagonal because there's a lot of tension in the paper, and it felt like it would be more precise to air fold than to try and have everything lay flat and let the tension do what it would with the paper. And flipping over, there is one more twist. An open square twist. And we do not have any overlaps because we have reached the end of the set of parallel pleats, which was also the last twist in the ring around the center. And we end up with a perfectly square paper again, with a lovely texture on it. And we have these concentric rings of open square, closed square, open square, that are precisely the rings around the center that we folded, in addition to all of these hybrid square twists on the back. So that's how I'm going to leave it for today. And like I mentioned, you could use a rotated grid to get those concentric rings lining up with the edge of the paper. This particular one, let's see, for our open squares, there's 4 of them in a row. That would be this layer. So I got 2 more rings of twists around this. This is probably 48 grid divisions on the rotated grid. And let's take a look at some of the backlighting. And I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat that I'll get to in a sec. So we've got the open holes and the open squares, dark areas in the closed squares. I also really like the backlighting on this side that emphasizes these groups of hybrid squares. Yeah, so I'm seeing questions like, can I simplify hybrid square twists? And if you're new to folding origami tessellations, I definitely recommend practicing the herringbone weave. I have a video that's just about hybrid squares and how to practice them in a simpler pattern where it doesn't matter which way you squash the twists. I'll make sure to link that in the video description after I'm done with the live stream. Or you can search on my channel and search for hybrid square twists. There's several videos that have tutorials for just that twist and patterns that use them. And all the variations on hybrid square twists as well. So this is our finished alternating buttons pattern, because it looks like we've got these small and large buttons that are alternating in the pattern. The secret is there's all these hybrid square twists on the back that are facilitating the whole thing. And if you want to learn more about this structure, about the relationship between the sizes of the square twists, and how I figured out more precisely like how to generate as many of these patterns as I want, there's going to be a live session in Tessellation Academy tomorrow, all about this topic. I call it the first symmetry extension in the square tiling, and you can join right now. So happy folding, everyone. Next week, I'll be working on a brand new pattern that actually is for Advent of Tess this coming year. That'll be in the ebook. So definitely don't miss that. I'll be working on like this brand new pattern, showing you how I figure out a new design. So happy folding, and I'll see you later.